and welcome back to our second panel of the HBCU Summit. This panel is entitled Leadership and the Role of Diversity in Policymaking. We want to give our students a chance to ask some questions and hear from two very seasoned political leaders in both states and federal government in our panelists today. And we are so honored that our esteemed moderator, who happens to be a good friend of mine, Kelvin Datcher, is joining us today. Kelvin is the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the city of Birmingham. He has been involved in local and city politics for a number of years, and he's one of the brightest people that I've had the pleasure of meeting over the course of my career. And Kelvin serves Mayor Randall Woodfin, who is a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta. So without further ado, Kelvin, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today and moderating this discussion.
Good morning, Terry. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. This is awesome. I didn't attend an HBCU, but I grew up in Alabama, surrounded by HBCUs. I also had the privilege of working at Alabama State University in Montgomery for about 7 years combined. So I've been fully immersed in HBCU culture. Also, I worked very closely with the Magic City Classic, the nation's largest HBCU football game every year. Birmingham is coming up October 30th, and we love to have y'all come down and hang out with us a little bit and see Birmingham and kind of the new spirit of our city. And quite frankly, it's been driven by, as Terry mentioned, HBCU graduate Randall Woodfin, who probably wears Morehouse gear as often as he wears Birmingham gear. So I am excited to be a part of this. And the two panelists that I have are really tremendous folks. I happen to know one closely and personally, and I'm excited to get to know the other one. And so I will introduce and allow her to talk a little bit about herself, and then we will spend some time in the conversation, and then hopefully invite you all in to participate as well. So with that, Chantel Smith from far away from Alabama, upstate. Chantel, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've done and kind of what you do now?
Sure. I'm Chantel Smith. I am the Chief of Staff and Counsel to the Senate Majority in New York State. The Democrats, in all the history of New York, the Democrats have been in power only twice in history. And I actually worked for the majority both times. The first time I was floor counsel. That's the person that's on the floor and advises the senators on the procedural Robert's Rule of Procedure. And now we just won the majority, and I think pretty much permanently we'll have the majority for the rest of our days. And I am both counsel and chief of staff to the conference. So, I'm in upstate New York. I went to Siena College, which is a Catholic Princeton college, which was 5 minutes away from my house because I had never left my house. And then after 3 years at Siena, I did a year at American University because they had a semester abroad, which is not really abroad, it's just going from Albany to Washington, D.C. I loved Washington, D.C. I loved everything. I think I went to Howard's homecoming that year. I fell in love. And basically I decided I wanted to be in the DMV area. So I went to law school at University of Maryland School of Law in Baltimore. And it was the first time I'd really been in an inner city. Did that, graduated, did the clerkship with a judge for a year, and then moved back to New York and started working at the Senate. And I've been here since 2009. So that's my wonderful journey.
And thank you so much. I can't imagine how busy you are right now.
It's a little busy, my state's in chaos, but disgraced governor. Since I've worked here, we've had a governor, like, if you name it, I've experienced it. I experienced it too. I know more felons at work than I do in my personal life. It's a lot in New York. New York, stay ready and we stay busy. So I'm glad to be here and just give you guys a little taste of what it's like.
So, as chief of staff, how many folks does that entail, and what is that like day to day as chief of staff? And then we'll talk a little bit about your other role, kind of as an advisor.
So, for chief of staff, I'm in charge of our legal department, our press department, our external relations, which is like our community department, our policy department, and our finance department. So, all in all, it's about 200 to 25 staffers that I am like responsible for. And then in addition, I'm responsible for a handful of the leader's personal staff. She has staff in Yonkers, which is where she's from. I'm just her cousin. And she also has staff in Albany, or when she's in Albany. So it's like about, I'd say somewhere about 235 staffers I'm responsible for.
So let me step aside from your daily work. So they're significant, probably as significant as any state in the nation, female leadership in the state of New York right now. I mean, it's probably unprecedented.
But it's sad.
It's exciting, right? Kind of exciting. Yeah?
It's exciting, but it's also pathetic. Like, you know, when my boss became a conference leader in 2000, I think it was 13, who was the first female conference leader in the state of New York. Then in 2019, it was the first time a woman was, you know, they say 3 men in the room, you know, the governor, the assembly leader, and the Senate leader. This is the first time a woman was in the room. And then, you know, we just got the first female AG, Tish James, and just had the first female governor that we got through the vote because Andrew Cuomo had to resign because he was doing allegedly bad things. So, you know, it's just, it's great because as women come in power, they bring other women, but it shouldn't be like that. Like, I shouldn't be the first, you know, female chief of staff in the Senate. I shouldn't be the first woman of color in these positions. Like, we're at a place in society where I just believe that it should be a little bit easier. And I don't want to be the first all the time. Like, I want to be like the second or the third, or I just want it to be so common that like no one thinks about my race or my sex.
Sure. But you are. And and we want to celebrate that, right? I mean, for you, not in terms of our larger kind of challenges that we have, but in terms of the great work that you've obviously done, the way you've conquered obstacles. I'm sure I can't imagine them. Well, I can, because, you know, New York politics is pretty, you know, we get to see it, right? It plays out all across the country. And so with what's just happened with your former governor, with the incredible, really assertive leadership of the AG, it really is a dichotomy, right? Because you want to be excited and proud, but at the same time, you have to look back and say, like, why? Like, what took us so long to get here? Yeah. You know,
and like, even, you know, like right now we have the first woman, and like, you know, her term will end and we have to decide like who's going to be the next governor. And there's, you know, there's talks of, you know, Tish running for governor. There's talks of Kat, but it's just like, they're like, oh, Tish, she'd be the first, you know, woman of color. It's just like, why can't she just be the, you know, a person? And it just gets to the point, because I think sometimes people, especially the press, hyper focus on race and gender. And with that concentration on race and gender is subtle biases and subtle messaging.
Well, it's built on it. I mean, it's built on bias.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
exactly.
And not just kind of the challenges that have prevented it from happening before, but just, I mean, sometimes that, again, that hyper focus, use the phrase that you use, says, you know, kind of says, well, nobody was qualified
to do it before.
So
right.
Think
and
of
then,
the of
and then it doesn't allow you to be an original and do it the way you think you should do it, because the previous people were white men or white women, and this is how they did it. So if you don't do it the way they did it, you don't know what you're doing.
Right, and you're built in you kind of built, there's a box built around you in terms of, you know, yeah. So we're also excited to have somebody I do know is hometown guy from Birmingham who has done incredibly well. And so Dana Gresham, good morning, Dana.
Hey, good morning, Kelvin.
How are you?
Great to see you.
Good to see you as well. And so, as I did just a few minutes with Chantel, if you would just say kind of a little bit about yourself and your background, and we'll dive and have a little fun this morning.
Sure. Well, Chantel, great to meet you over the internet, as they say. And Kelvin, great to sort of be in your presence again. I
Yes.
love my hometown of Birmingham. So any chance I have to meet and greet someone from the hometown is always a good day. So appreciate you sort of inviting me to be here. My name is Dana Gresham. Currently, I'm a principal at a Washington-based public policy and advocacy firm called Mindset. Started in this position in March of this year. Prior to March, and I served as chief of staff for Senator Doug Jones from the great state of Alabama. And interestingly enough, when I was hired for the position in 2018, I was the only African-American chief of staff in the Senate Democratic caucus. And so that made a bit of news when I was hired. Interestingly, on the Republican side, there were at least 2 African-American Senate chiefs of staff, but for quite some time, there was not a African-American chief of staff. So I was the first since a colleague of ours, Donald Cravens, who served as chief of staff for Senator Landrieu from Louisiana. So the South understands very well the need for diversity and representation in these positions. So Senator Jones, I've known for quite some time, as have you, Kelvin, and he asked me to serve in this position, and it made some news. And frankly, I was somewhat surprised that it made such big news because one, I had been working in the Alabama delegation for quite some time. I previously served as a chief of staff for a House member. I worked in the House of Representatives for 14 years. And over that 14-year period, I started off as a staff assistant, worked my way up, was a legislative director for another member of the Alabama delegation, served as a chief of staff for a member of the Alabama delegation. And after President Obama was elected, I had the opportunity to work on the Obama-Biden transition team, and then I was nominated and confirmed by the Senate to serve as Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs at the Department of Transportation. I did that role for about 8 years. So I had served in fairly senior positions over the course of my career. And while I was very proud and happy to be appointed chief of staff, I felt that that was a natural progression in my career. And that the fact that it made news gave me a sense of where we are in this country in terms of sort of diversity and inclusion issues. And so did that job for 3 years and had the opportunity to once again work for the, this time, the Biden-Harris transition team shortly after the November elections, and took the occasion after working 25 years in public service to try my hand in the private sector. So here I am, and, but still wanted to stay connected to public service and public policy. And so look forward to the discussion.
So we're really going to lean in on kind of your inside and outside experience, kind of how things are looking. But I'm going to slide back to Chantel very quickly. And Chantel, talk a little bit about, because you said you manage on that staff that you have. How do you navigate between kind of your boss, right, and then everybody else who wants access, right? I mean, people clamor for it. You know, there are people like Dana now, right, who want to make sure that they can provide access and information and consultation. Do you have folks in your team who directly engage, say, lobbyists and other governmental entities, or is that largely your role? And that's for Chantel.
So I, right before I took the job as chief of, well, I've been with my leader, my boss, since 2014. So right before I took the job as chief of staff in 2019, can you hold on for a second? Can you all close the door? I'm on a piano. Sorry, my office is just very rude. So in 2019, before I took the job, I read this book, Gatekeepers, and it was all the chief of staffs to the various presidents, from Lyndon Johnson, I think, to like Obama. And I never understood the importance of a chief of staff to be a gatekeeper until I read that book. I I know Andrea's schedule. Like everyone has different ways they govern and how their chief of staff. I have the leader's schedule. When people want access to her, like there's some people that have direct access to her. That's fine. But then for the people who don't have direct access, I believe as chief of staff, my job is to make sure that not just anybody can reach out and send their opinions to her or, hey, can you do this? Because when you're a chief of staff, your job is to be the mean person. Like my boss tells us good news, I do all the bad news. Like I'm the hitter. So, you know, there's certain people who she'll give her number out and then she'll be like, oh, like, it's just, I'm sure we've all been in these situations where we see someone, we don't want to be rude, so we'll give them some number and then the person demands access to you. So, you just have to, I diligently like make sure I know who's reaching out to her. Now, there's certain people like members, they should always have access to the leader. I think for lobbyists and governmental affairs people, you have to know the levels. Like there are levels to this. Not everybody gets access to the majority leader. Not everyone gets access to the chief of staff. You have to figure out the levels based on the relationship the government affairs staff has built with your team, the relationship the governmental staffer or lobbyist has with the majority leader, or just the issue. Is it important? Do you know enough about it? Is it something that's bubbling up and you're going to have to make a critical decision about it soon? So there's many different considerations when figuring out who has access to her.
How do you make that because that vetting, that's kind of, that has to be like the most important part of, like, in terms of who you rely on from the outside, right, when they're representing other agencies, perhaps maybe corporations, maybe special interests, so to speak. How do those people gain your trust? Like what is it about their approach that allows you to feel like, okay, I can trust you to come into the bubble?
So the first thing I would say for any government affairs staffer is know the body. So in the Senate for years, we were actually it was very close. It was like 29-31, where the Republicans only had the majority by like a couple of people.
Right.
So people who were reaching out to us when we were in the minority, even though we didn't have power, they will always have access to us because when we had nothing, they were with us. Right. And people don't think that loyalty is important in governmental affairs. Loyalty is very important because if you're with me when I'm at the bottom, sure, you can be with me at the top. And it's easier to say, oh, you want a meeting? You can have a meeting. For the people who you don't know, which I didn't know a lot of people, because a lot of people didn't think we would ever be in power.
Right.
I basically got to know, I did a lobbyist tour where I got to know all the labor unions, all the major lobbyists and corporations, and anybody that went to meet with Andrea, me and my core deputies would filter through. And that's how we got to know people based on our experiences. And if they weren't mean or jerks or liars or whatever, then, we would reach out to them. There were so many issues that were bottled up for years when we won the majority. So there were a lot of things that like we may have had preconceived notions about, but you had to reach out to the industry person, the governmental affairs person. So what any majority will do is they'll pick a core staff, and these are your senior staff, and these are the people that you trust their judgment. And based on those staffers and those interactions with governmental affair folks, industry folks, that's how you get to know, who is who and what's what.
Dana, when you were with Senator Jones, he was pretty much, I think he was probably considered the most bipartisan member of the Senate. So you guys probably got it from both sides, so to speak, right? Talk a little bit about that, how you were able to juggle some of that, because there had to be some pressure on the senator to kind of, one, be very open to be bipartisan, but also be, he was elected as a Democrat. Talk a little bit about how you kind of threaded that needle.
Sure. And also, I sort of neglected to say, I wanted to sort of, part of my sort of appearance in today's panels, I also was fortunate enough to be appointed as a fellow for the George Washington Graduate School of Political Management. Every academic year, they essentially pick 3 fellows typically two former members of Congress, a Republican and a Democrat, and one senior official from DC who's been engaged in the public policy environment over an extended period of time. So I was fortunate enough to be selected, and they are working very closely to make sure that there's a good pipeline from HBCUs into the Graduate School of Political Management, which serves as a training ground for some of the key legislators and policy thinkers in this town. So I want to say that at the top. In terms of sort of the bipartisan, you're absolutely correct. Senator Jones came into office on a sort of with some national attention. He won in a special election in December of 2017, and when many folks did not think he would win that race, and he sort of gave the Democrats at the time a bit of hope after a disappointing 2016 race. But that put a lot of pressure on him to work cooperatively across the aisle, and as from Alabama, as you know, we are accustomed to working across the aisle to get things done. At the core of working in a bipartisan fashion is also an understanding of your core values. Senator Jones had a very clear sense of his core values, and he would not deviate from those core values just for the sake of engaging in bipartisan negotiations. His view of bipartisanship was that to engage in bipartisan negotiations to further your core values. And there's always areas in which you can cooperate and reach out in good faith across the aisle and find common ground if both parties are able to compromise and give a little without going against your core values, or without impugning the motives of your negotiating partner. So issue after issue, we would routinely reach across the aisle to find if there was an opportunity for common ground, and we would be willing to sort of compromise on the specifics of a legislative matter in order to move closer toward our Republican negotiators without fundamentally giving up your sort of betraying your core values. So, and frankly, the way the process, the institutions are designed, you actually need that. You need members who are willing to negotiate and work with one another to find a common ground to move an agenda. But that oftentimes leads to incremental progress, which people look asunder at these days. But the nature of our democracy is built upon incremental progress. The nature of our legislative process is built upon doing things a bit at a time. It's very difficult to do big things very quickly in this legislative body. And so in order to be productive and effective in that process, you actually have to find the common ground and compromise.
Chantel, we have, audience of students, primarily HBCU students today. You are the first, but we definitely don't want you to be the last in your role. How does someone begin that journey, that journey you talked about a little bit? And Dana, we're going to come back and ask you the same thing, so I'll give you a second to think about it. But Chantel, how would you advise them to kind of get their foot in the door or be prepared for that big break?
So I will be very honest. My way into coming into this position was very non-traditional. I was a lawyer, and I had just finished my clerkship, and I actually had failed the bar. And because I failed the bar, I had to study again, but I had to leave my clerkship because it was ending, and I left Maryland. I would say for most people, going to networking opportunities is a good way to start. A lot of people go to networking up. I can't speak for everyone else. I'm like an introverted extrovert. So I go out, but I have to do it for work. It's not my preference. I'm not really good at networking. It's something that I've gotten really good the past couple of years because I'm forced to do it every day. What happens a lot of times is that people go to networking events, but they don't network. They are not talking to people.
Yeah.
They hang out in the corner with whatever friends that they know that went to the event. When I was in graduate school, I was going to these things. When I was in law school, I was going there for free food because I was poor in law school. But like people are going for the free drinks, the free food, or you're hanging out with whatever 2 or 3 people you know.
Right.
Push out, push through. You need to go to these networking events and really try to connect with people, because when I moved to New York, I was unemployed. I studied for the bar for a little bit and then I was unemployed. I went to some Black Law Association event in Albany. I didn't know anyone in Albany. I introduced myself to a bunch of Black attorneys. And I was like, look, I'm new in the city, trying to find a job. And they were like, oh, the Senate Democrats just won the majority. Send me your resume. I sent the resume, never spoke to that person ever again. And somehow they forwarded my resume to someone, and that's how I got this job. I think networking is very important. I think going to different events, if you're in politics, we always hire people who work on campaigns. You know, like if you want to get involved, let's say you went to work actually in government, work on a campaign for someone who may win. That's one way to get in. Work for unions, attend networking events. I would even say like we have different conferences, like we have caucus, which is like the Black Puerto Rican Latino conference in February. Attend those and go to panels.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself to people. We have Somos, which is like a big Hispanic conference in November. Everyone across the state goes to Somos because that's where people are like wheeling and dealing. And you may say, well, I don't know anybody there. Pay a ticket to Puerto Rico, spend 2 days. Don't even go to like conference events. Network. They're all hanging out at the bar afterwards. Introduce yourself. You'd be surprised. I meet people at so many different events, and sometimes they're just really captivating. Right now, I'll give you a prime example. The National Conference of Black State Legislators had a conference in Brooklyn, 2018. We had just won the election November 6th. The conference was like November 20th. There was a Queen's Night event, and just like random people were there. And I got introduced to this lovely young man. He worked for the Drug Policy Alliance. I hire him. He works for me for 2 years. Then he goes to private industry for cannabis. We just now made him the head of marijuana for the whole state of New York. And the reason why he got the job is because I was like, hire him. He used to work for me. And my boss was like, we love him. Go to events. You'll never know who you meet. You'll never know what happens. You don't know what's going to happen in the random person you meet at an event. So my recommendation is push yourself, be an extrovert for that hour and a half, and then go back home and be a hermit and just close your things and never speak to anybody.
Dana, we're going to ask you a very similar question. And I think, Terry, that we're going to make sure that the students have the opportunity to get questions in, because you don't get access to these kind of folks very easily. Dana, how does someone, what's your advice for folks kind of getting the door? And very specifically, how do they prepare their knowledge base so that they can be conversational about particular issues and have that kind of captivating moment that Chantel just talked about?
Right. So one, I always encourage people, one, you have to have a sort of passion for public service, and you have to be fluent in public policy. So certainly you have to have very strong interpersonal skills, be able to sort of interact and meet with people and put people at ease and inject a sense of confidence in you. But you also have to be fluent and competent in the sort of policy realm. If you're interested in sort of legislating, you sort of have to understand the process and be fluent and knowledgeable of the legislative process. So I always tell folks, one, you want to sort of have a base of knowledge of the legislative process. Two, you need to have a passion for public service and be able to sort of demonstrate that. And three, you have to have good communication skills and good interpersonal skills. It's absolutely critical, as Chantel suggested, that you're able to sort of build and expand your network. I started on the Hill I started my career as an intern on the Hill for our hometown Congressman Earl Hilliard.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure that that was the path I wanted to take. Graduating from Georgetown and always enjoyed politics, always enjoyed public service. But coming out of college, I thought I wanted to make more money and work less hours. And that was not.
That is not the path you went, brother. I'm just going to tell you that.
But what I found is I always had a passion for public service, a passion for policy, and a passion for politics and contributing to my community. And I thoroughly enjoyed my internship. And what it often comes down to is, at least early in your career, there are a boatload of people who can do all these jobs. What distinguishes one person from the next is not necessarily their knowledge base, but their sort of reputation, their validators, and their passion. And so if you present well and if you approach people humbly, I think most people will be responsive. I found that most people will be responsive to that and be helpful to you and to help build your career. But you do have to sort of have a base level knowledge. You do have to have a passion for public service, a passion for policy, and ability to interact with people and talk to folks and communicate to people.
Can I just hop on real quick about something that Dana said?
Yes.
So in politics, a lot of time, like the people who are in politics, their family was in politics. So a lot of time, the people that do governmental affairs, their daddy or mommy has a lobby firm, or like politics is a old boys club.
Yeah.
So it's who you know. So if you don't have that like connection, always try to do externships or internships for people, because that will give you direct one-on-one experience when an elected there's nothing greater than this elected official vouching for you, whether it's for an elected, if it's for a union, if it's for a lobby firm. Try to get in some way if you don't have a connection. And then I think Dana also said something, he made a joke about how he thought he wanted to make a lot of money and work less hours. Don't be scared to take a position or an opportunity because you don't make money. Because if you really love something and it's truly your passion, you'll be really good at it. And don't worry, you'll get to the money. You'll get to the money.
Right.
There's money flowing in politics. Right. You'll get to the money.
And I just want to sort of re-emphasize that point. That is, I think sometimes it's sort of people coming up through a professional career really focus in on the compensation perspective. And certainly we all sort of need to take care of our families and live and all that stuff. But it's the work that's important. I've always found if you focus on the job, focus on the work, and whether or not you have an opportunity to grow and are learning in that job, that will put you on a pathway for success and compensation. But sort of to be focused in immediately on compensation, it hardens off opportunities for personal and professional growth that's sort of long-term and lasting.
Amen. I was the lowest paying staffer in 2009 out of the councils, and I am the highest paying staffer in the Senate now. So don't let don't fall into the trap of, oh, I got student loans, I got to pay it. Blah, 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 blah. You will make money if you love what you do. It will happen.
Yeah. Cool. It sounds like you'll be buying me a cup of coffee when I come to Albany. Hey, guys, we had a great question from Khadijah from Clark Atlanta University. She's like, how do you think we can educate our community on the importance of holding positions in government? Oftentimes, people are intimidated by politics. Let me add a little nugget on the end or tag on the end of that. I hear so many people say, I hate politics. I don't want to play. I want anything to do with politics. And I just yell at folks from my little position in Birmingham. Do you think politics doesn't drive a lot of things around you going to work on what kind of roads you're driving and what kind of schools your kids going to have? And anyway, just how do we make sure our folks stay involved and get involved in public service and then respect those roles? and what those roles can do. And I'll start with you, Chantel, if I can.
You know, I think there's always this misconception like my vote doesn't count or I'm not important. You see that a lot when you go around for various campaigns. I always just give them examples of how your vote does matter and the difference between losing a campaign and winning a campaign. I think the primary example was this recent presidential election.
Right.
Biden winning, that was the third stimulus check. That was money going into states that changed people's lives and gave them breathing room. I don't know if
American Rescue Plan. Here, Birmingham, hello.
Exactly. I don't know if that third check would have came under Trump. You have to show them prime examples. Like when things happen in New York, for example, we passed like a housing law in 2019 where no longer do you have to, can people charge exorbitant security checks? Security checks. The security deposits.
Right.
You just find things that touch people on a real everyday basis. Like for example, the speed limit. In New York right now, they're trying to make the speed limit 20 miles per hour in New York City. Can you imagine how long that would take to get to school if the traffic is 20 miles per hour? You have to show them real life examples of the consequences of them not being engaged and them not being involved. However, it is hard to fight the misconception that my vote doesn't count. So it also requires electeds to be engaged. I always show people, you can see what communities there's a high voting population amongst the communities of colors versus when there's low voting amongst the community of colors in a certain area. Because the people who hold their electeds accountable get stuff. When it's time to negotiate the budget, the people who have voters that will hold them to the fire after their budget vote gets extra money for schools, gets extra money for roads, gets money for blah, 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 blah. Where the people where there's low voter turnout, they don't really care. And for a primary, there's maybe 1,000 votes, they don't get some of the stuff. So you really have to push and show them how their vote does matter and that it is important.
Dana, right now with the quote unquote infrastructure bill, Build Back Better, American Jobs Plan, all the different iterations of it, which is, for context and common language called the infrastructure bill. Your experience, I think, in transportation might make you a very different kind of a government, or put you in a different position as a government relations leader. Talk a little bit about having real substantial knowledge and practical knowledge about a subject can make you more valuable to an elected official. For someone coming from the outside now, how does that specific experience that you have had being in Department of Transportation prepare you to offer some real value to an elected official?
Yeah, I think most people, when they look at the government affairs space, they look at those sort of practitioners as relationship facilitators or door openers. I think that is certainly a valuable and key component of government relations practice and business. You have to be able to form relationships and get access to decision makers. But what also is helpful and differentiates individuals within that practice is their subject area expertise and on specific issues. That is a marketing tool and a value add in a policy discussion. Oftentimes that policymakers are interested in understanding the facts, understanding without a lot of spin associated with it, and having deep substantive knowledge, whether it's on transportation as it is on my case, or whether it's healthcare policy or defense policy, or whatever those issues, that allows you to help drive a policy debate and help policymakers make an informed decision, which will ultimately lead to a sort of long-term relationship with that policymaker. At the end of the day, policymakers have to go into the floor and make a decision and make a vote based upon the information they've received and how their perception of a particular issue. If you've been able to be forthcoming with them, to provide them with facts, even if that fact pattern is inconsistent with the interest of the position you're pushing, that builds a record of trust with that policy maker that is sort of long lasting. And you can always go back to that policymaker and have a frank and open conversation. Sometimes I think people in the government affairs practice are focused more on the advocacy part and pushing for a position as opposed to educating. And I think in this environment, the education component is much more valuable and much more important for the long term than the sort of hard advocacy and pushing.
Sure. Chantel, if you will, I mean, your eyes are where you are. I make a bet. I haven't seen your birth certificate, but I bet you're one of the younger folks in your role in the country, right? What can folks who are watching this, who are in college right now, what can they do to develop the kind of leadership skills, that you need to not just be a candidate for a position like yours, but really to thrive and excel in that? What can they do? What would you recommend they do kind of, in their college world right now?
What did I do in college so long ago? When I was in college, I'll be honest, I did a lot of I took courses that challenged my writing skills, my research skills, because if you work in government affairs or even if you're a lobbyist, you gotta research to be able to explain complex issues in a simple way.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of and I also went to law school, so I did a lot of research and writing. I cannot tell you how many people have poor writing skills. And I am not a top grade writer, but I can write something without grammatic. Please work on your writing, because you think it doesn't matter, but the minute when we hire counsels in the minority, we would give them a bill and we'd be like, write 4 or 5 sentences of what this bill does. Just send us something, because I can get everyone's overly edited, writing sample that they decide to give me. But can you write on the spot, on the fly? Because that's what's going to be required when it's budget time and I get some new proposal thrown at me and we have a half an hour to research it. So anything for research skills, anything for writing skills. Look, everybody's not a great speaker, but if you know that's something that you struggle with and you want to be in governmental affairs, work on it. Take some classes. At least you can take it for free while you're in college, then have to pay, these exorbitant fees for people teaching you how to speak eloquently. Networking, like I already said, and just a positive disposition, because I don't want to hire anybody and I don't want to be around nobody that's got a nasty attitude. It's already hard enough for me every single day.
Talk about that. I think that is so underestimated. I don't either. And we don't hire folk who are sour faces when they come to work. Seriously,
I just want to tell you, every day I wake up, my dog wakes me up and I'm like, what shit we getting into today?
Right.
That's what I'm dealing with every day and my mental. So you think I want some staffer that says they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that, they have an attitude, they think they know, they tell them, nah, homie, there's only one queen bee, it's me, please. Right. I don't think people understand. I'll be honest, you know why I moved up throughout the ranks? Because whenever there was extra work, I was like, give it to me. So we had coups in 2009 and 10, where the Republicans sided with 3 people and took over the majority. We had to do a month of litigation. There was a month stalemate. I was like, I will stay here late. I'm not a litigating attorney. I will help write and research. I will stay up late. You want me to stay with Senator X and just make sure she has company while she holds guard in the chamber? I'll do it. Simple things like photocopying. Let's say we make copies and everyone's sitting with the senators. Does someone be like, oh, I can hand it out here? People want to be around people who want to help out and be part of the team. And if you don't want to be a part of the team, you'll look stink, you'll act stink, and it'll be stink all around. And no one's going to want to be around you. And it's going to prohibit you from really excelling. Like nobody wants to deal with a bad attitude.
And you can see it pretty quickly, right? I mean, you can
can
pick that up
see
pretty
it,
quickly.
you can feel it, the heat hits you, like it's nasty. And nobody wants to deal with it. And positive disposition, like the one thing I can say, like I'm a ball buster, like I am tough. But like when people get to know me, they're like, wow, you're so much fun. And I just think like you got to remember it every day, like everybody has a hard life. It is hard right now, especially in a pandemic. Nobody wants to be around it. You just don't.
So Dana, we have a question from Elijah from the Jaguar Nation at Southern University. Elijah's like, what are some of the challenges that you face, particularly as an African-American, kind of rising through the ranks internally in the way that you have?
Yeah, so I think what's been important for me and what's been key to my sort of growth, professional growth over the years in different capacities is sort of understanding the environment I was engaged in and working in and want to grow in. You have two choices in public service, really. You can be a part of the system and grow in that system, or you can work and push that system from the outside. It's very difficult to be an activist when you're in a public policy position and you're growing.
Can you say that again, Dana? Can you just say that again for the people in the back?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult to impossible to be an activist when you are actually a public servant and a staffer in these positions. I think some people make the mistake that they are passionate about specific issues and that their position should rule the day and that the system should adapt to them as opposed to them adapting to the system and trying to make positive changes within the system. It's well and good to be an activist, but you will be extraordinarily frustrated and have a short career if you attempt to be an activist while also working within a constrained environment. So for me, it was important to understand who I was and my value system and what I want to do. And then to understand the system in which I made a commitment to working in. And so when I was staff assistant, I was a Georgetown guy and thought I was like one of the smartest guy in the room. Every day I was answering phones and going to get lunch for the congresswoman. Not really my ideal job.
Right.
It's like I should be chief of staff, right off the top. And
right now, I'm ready. Come in.
But you sort of understand that what the system you're in, where the pecking order, and how to grow in that system. What was also for me to understand is the centers of power in that structure. Sometimes that power center is the member. Sometimes that power center is the chief of staff. Sometimes it's the executive assistant who known the congressman who grew up with the congressman or congresswoman and knows all their secrets. So you sort of understand the power center within that structure and bring value to that power center and make their life easier. I always found that if you can make others above you life easier, you're bringing value. My dad always told me, son, you always want to be useful. Otherwise you're useless. And if you're useless, I can't really, you don't really have any use. And so I've always focused in on trying to be useful in what other power structure I'm in. Certainly we have some additional constraints based upon race, and we're cognizant of it. I think there's a duality that we're in these powerful positions. I think people forget that we have to bring value and we have obligations as well. And certainly life is not fair. And there are some inequalities that we would all want to see disappear. But at the end of the day, I have to bring value in the position I'm in. If I don't bring value in that position, if I don't move an agenda, I won't be in that position long. And so part of that is adapt for folks to understand. They kind of have to adapt to the system if they're going to sort of work and grow and thrive in that system.
Chantel, we have another question from Khadijah again at Clark. How do you build your agenda? Certainly, you play a key role in identifying policy priorities, not just for the majority leader, but certainly for the entire state at this point. How do you identify those? What, is it, I mean, do you watch the local news? Like, how do you figure out what those real needs are and begin to drive them towards being included in the agenda for the state of New York?
So like right now, my staff is reaching out to, like everyone has an issue area and everyone's reaching out to the lobbyists and industry people in that issue area. And right now we're finding out what are the things that you're going to advocate for next year and what are the things that you think are up and coming and people are talking. It's reading the news, it's knowing, I'll even say going on Twitter and seeing what the mood and the climate is amongst people. Even though Twitter is not real life, it can give you a lot of useful information. And then just dealing, sometimes, I personally like to get in the field and go around and just see, meet with different community organizing groups, not like big lobbyists or big tech or big, but just like a Make the Road who deals with immigrants, or like an NAACP that deals with social justice issues, or, it's just reaching out to as many different people as possible and getting a global sense of things that people are going to be advocating for, and then using your judgment and also knowing the people that you work for, what are the things that they would want to focus on. So some of it's like, okay, these are the members' pet projects that they want to get accomplished. Okay. And then what are the conference-wide big signature agenda things that we want to do to make New York State better and we want to push for it. So last year was taxing the rich.
Right.
We felt that due to COVID, people weren't, the people who didn't have money, they weren't really, taken care of. So we did tax the rich, but then we also focused on the people who didn't have access to to federal money, which were the undocumented, because unfortunately they didn't have access.
Right.
And they were struggling. So they didn't get stimulus checks. They didn't get certain things. So we had to find a way to fund them. And we created the Excluded Workers Fund, which was something totally different when it was first introduced by the member. But then we realized the need during budget time to really focus on this subgroup of people. And we catered and drafted a bill that could be accepted by the conference while also achieving the goal of helping certain people.
Okay. I know I'm the moderator, but I am compelled to say this. Folk got to read, right? I mean, I know it's just, people just don't read, and we hear a one-liner on news or what used to be 140 characters on Twitter, and we never get beyond that surface. I cannot imagine the number of competing interests that you have, right? I mean, the number of people that are tugging at you, text messages. I mean, first of all, let me thank both of you guys for this time, because I know that your email is blowing the frig up right now. I know
just put mine on mute because it was like blinging and dinging, and I was like, all right.
But talk about that importance of being able to get beneath the surface of a single line topic, right?
So what I find the most effective lobbyists or government affairs people, they know their issue area, and then they know what people are going to say against their issue area.
Wow. Okay.
Then they have solutions. So you can say oh, tax the rich. And then you say, but if we tax the rich, billionaires will leave. Okay, well, maybe you don't tax at this rate, you tax at another rate. Know your end goal. The end goal is just to increase money and access to people who need it. Your top line is what you're pushing for. But if I come back and retort and tell you, well, this, and this is what I have concerns for, don't say, well, this is the only way that we're going to save people. Go home, do some research, talk to some people, come back to some alternative things. Every proposal I have passed is never the original proposal. We always tweak and kink and do different things to meet the needs of my members so no one's taking a bad vote. So figure out what the goal is and figure out different pathways to your goal. But you have to know your issue area in order to do that. People just come in and say, oh, you're Black, I'm Black, defund the police, or oh, you're Black, I'm Black, I need it. No, what do you want to achieve? This is not politically capable. Are we going to work together to find a way to what you want to achieve? When I first came here, I would have lobbyists come up to me and be like, this is a bad bill. And they'd give me their memo of opposition. And I would slap back and be like, so maybe you're telling me it needs amendments. Do you have any? And if they do have amendments, we work towards it. If you don't have amendments and you're not trying to give me amendments because all you want is what you want, well then goodbye. And you won't get another meeting. So that's how I work.
Oh my, I cannot believe we only have 4 or 5 minutes left. Dana, what would be, I mean, let's say you're walking into a classroom, you got 90 seconds and you got these HBCU students who are chomping at the bit, who really want to serve their community in government and public service. What do you say? 90 seconds, like what do you say? Like the good, the bad, how to do it. I mean, like, give me that.
Yeah, so one, I make the argument that if you don't think public service matters or your vote matters, look across the country at what's going on with all these changes and these restrictive voting rights matter. Someone thinks your vote matters. And so,
obviously, right? Like 400 bills or something, right?
Yeah. So one, you have to be you have to have a passion and be engaged in the political discourse. Two, you have to be approach it in a sort of humble way. I'll often say, you talk about read with understanding is the sort of key thing to that issue. So we all get sort of distracted by everything that comes across our plate. But what separates the sort of really good staffers from like the surface level staffers are folks who can get deep and understand and have a fluency on policy issues. So if that's something you're interested in, learn your craft, know your craft, and dedicate some time into being really good at what you do. All the rest will flow from that. If you're not so good and you're like a cool guy, that'll take you so long. But at the end of the day, if you're not good, that will be limiting. So you really do have to be good at what you do, and everything else flows from that.
15 seconds. Tell me where you grew up and how you grew up.
Grew up in Birmingham, Alabama.
What high school?
Went to Parker High School.
Right.
And we're talking about, it's good to say, folks say majority, minority. This was like an all Black high school. It's like not majority, not minority. In the inner city, I grew up at Parker and went to Parker High School and had opportunity to go to Georgetown University. So I went from Parker, I was student government president, but I had a vision of myself and what I could do in this world, and didn't sort of let my surroundings discourage me from that vision, and sort of pushed forward.
Chief of Staff from Birmingham, Alabama, Parker High School, the Chief of Staff for United States. I'm sorry, I'll have a second there. From Parker High School in Birmingham, Alabama, the Chief of Staff for United States Senator. And Chantel grew up. What little town was that, Chantel?
I was Albany. I grew up I was a little Black girl in the suburbs. I'd claim it. I went to, I remember I watched the OJ trial and I was like, I want to be a lawyer, because I was like, I love me some Johnny Cochran. I remember when I was in, we had guidance counselors. And I remember I was like, I want to go to Georgetown. I want to be a lawyer. And she looked at me and was like, okay, yeah, no. And then I didn't get into Georgetown, but I went to college. And when I was in college, I was like, I want to go to a tier 1 law school. And they were like, yeah, you should apply to this tier 4 law school, Albany Law. And I was like, nah, I'm going to a tier 1. Catch me. Believe in yourself. Like, I have a cup. Like, I believe in myself. Like Kanye believes in himself. Everybody should believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, I think Marcus Garvey says it, you're like twice defeated in life, because these people ain't gonna believe in you if you don't believe in you.
Chief of Staff and Counsel to the majority in the state of New York. Dana and Chantel, I cannot thank you enough for giving us this precious time in the middle of your day for our students and our next generation leadership here in the United States of America. Terry?
Thank you so much,
This
Kelvin.
was awesome. This was awesome.
This was great. This was great. This was such a great panel. So much knowledge and experience on this panel. I will not tell a lie. I did text Kelvin, ask them this, ask them this. There's so much to learn here. So thank you, Chantel. Thank you, Dana, for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you, Kelvin, for hosting. For our students that are on this panel, we do have a Trailblazer Awards that George Washington School of Political Management is hosting, where they will spotlight some of the talent that's come out of their school. We hope you will join us for that. We'll kick off bright and early tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Central, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, where we will talk with some governmental affairs directors from some of the country's top corporate entities, and we'll wrap up our summit tomorrow with Congresswoman Alma Adams, who will be our keynote speaker. She is a phenomenal woman who has served at all levels of government. She is the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus, and we cannot wait to hear all the knowledge and wisdom she imparts on this. Chantel, Dana, thank you so much, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.